You've come to the right place if you're a course creator looking to build more impact, income, and freedom. LMScast is the #1 podcast for course creators just like you. I'm your guide, Chris Badgett. I'm the co-founder of the most powerful tool for building, selling, and protecting engaging online courses called LifterLMS. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome back to another episode of LMScast. My name is Chris Badgett and I'm joined by a special guest, Jason Resnick. He's a fellow podcaster. His podcast is Live in the Feast. He's over at res.com. That's REZZ.com. And we're going to be having a conversation today around the ideal client. It seems obvious. We may think we know how to, develop this ideal client or this customer avatar, or this perfect customer, and what it's all about. But there's a lot going on there. And if you get it wrong, if you mess it up, or you just ignore it, you're leaving a lot of opportunity on the table. But first, Jason, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here. And it's finally great to have a chat with you face to face and not through 140 or 250 characters.
Yeah, this is the power of modern social media marketing. I feel like it took me maybe like 5 years to figure out what Twitter actually, like what it was and how it works. I've seen you on there, and as a fellow podcaster, you have a lot of great content, and you're also engaged in the online community, which is important, especially in WordPress and web design and marketing and all this stuff. So it's but then there is the actual meeting, and then maybe one day I'll see you at a conference and we'll meet in person.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's start with, like, how do you define the ideal customer? Like, why is this so important? But like, more importantly, like, what is it? Is it your best customer? Is it somebody you kind of make up based on patterns you see? Like, what is it?
Well, that's a big question, but I think it's really I like to differentiate between an ideal client and a niche or specialty, right?
Yeah.
Because I think a lot of people confuse the two or blur the two rather, right? And so when I talk about ideal client, I'm actually talking about the person, or the people that I'm working with or engaging with on the project, because it could be very different. Like I could be specializing in nonprofits that are, like they run events and races and things of that nature. And the people that are running it could be baby boomers, right? Or something like that. And maybe I just don't gel with that type of person. So they wouldn't be my ideal client, but my niche could be nonprofits, right? So that's kind of where I like to start, is just to identify what we're talking about here as far as the ideal client goes, and not necessarily your specialty or your niche. But the ideal client, in a way, is, and you said it perfectly, like it's not somebody that you make up, but it's somebody that you have seen patterns with, right? And so, you could gravitate towards guys or girls, or you could gravitate towards a certain age or something of that nature. But more importantly, I think it's more on the personality side of things, right? And so I it took a long time for me to figure out who my ideal client was. I'm opinionated. I have no problems telling people what's on my mind. I go into client engagement saying, hey, look, I'm going to come to the table with my experience. I'm going to come to the table with some assumptions of what I understand about your business, and I'm going to challenge you, and I want you to do the same for me. And so sometimes people aren't, you know, receptive to that. They're like, whoa, like slow down a little bit, right? I've had that. And other people are like, that's welcomed. Like, and so you really have to, for me, and how I figured out my ideal client was, one, I was very much a generalist way before I even started in the WordPress space, and just iterating through client projects and people and different industries and things of that nature. But then once I realized what I wanted to do for my clients and who I wanted to work with, then that's when I started paying attention to little things. Just the rapport that I have with somebody? Are they okay with the fact that I'm a solo owned and operated business? I work from home, right? So I got my kids' toys in the background, right? And so like that's where, some people are okay with and some people aren't. So those are the sort of things that I start to put in front of when I start to filter people. And I try to throw it out there because I can't change who I am. So I start to try to figure out those characteristics of that ideal client, if you will.
So there's a bunch of like honesty there and just like self-reflection. I mean, I'm hearing a lot of like psychographics, like they have to be coachable. Not only do they have to be coachable, they have to be open to having work with a professional who's going to be providing feedback and maybe taking some stands on an opinion. You need people that are trusting and not like it's like this adversarial and you just tell me what to
Mhm.
do relationship. Um, this is really cool. I mean, tell us more about your who. What other characteristics did you find?
Yeah. So I still kind of, I mean, I've been in business now for almost 10 years, right? Just running my own business. And still to this day, I'm still refining it.
It's never done. It's a work in progress
Right.
forever. Right.
Right. And so when I really started to like hone in on this sort of exercise, if you will, and like you said, like, oh, all of a sudden I have these three clients are awesome to work with. I enjoy, like, I get up in the morning and I know that I'm going to be working on these projects and it kind of excites me. And then, well, these other three, yeah, the project's cool, but I don't really want to talk to these people and like so on and so forth, right? So like you kind of start getting that. So then what what I found was, and I've built out a sort of a framework for myself, and I've put my coaching clients through it and things like that. But it's a framework where you're actually reflecting on the projects and the people that you'd like to work with. And really what it is asking questions of the person and or the project to kind of really start getting the characteristics out of it. Like, what do you like about it? What gets you amped up about it? What don't you like? Like, what gets you bummed about, even getting out of bed to work on this thing or work with this person? And you just make a list of what this is. And I call it the client quad because there's, a process around it. But really what happens is that you have just a bullet list of characteristics of what you like and what you don't like. And once you have those list of characteristics, then you start to say, hey, you start to look for those good qualities. And you start to actually say, hey, look, these are red flags over here. Like if somebody hits these sort of things like micromanagement, or like you said, they're not open to feedback. They're looking for just a pair of hands on the keyboard rather than somebody that's like a partner and really wants to have good success with this and we're working together for the same goal. These are some of my red flags, right? And so I always say to people, like, just because it's a red flag for me doesn't mean it's a red flag for somebody else. But the the things that I look for are, one, like I said before, they have to realize that I'm just me. I don't have a team behind me. So we're going to prioritize the tasks and work. And if things shuffled, well, deadlines get shuffled, right? And so, because I can only do so much, right? So they have to be accepting of that. And sure, I've had people come through that wanted to give me money and they were like, you sure, you have nobody else to do work for you? No, it's just me. And people say, like, we much rather have an agency. We would have loved to hire you, but we would have much rather had an agency. And that's fine. There's nothing I can do about that. Some of the other characteristics that I look for, I actually now put on my project brief, which is an application that happens before I even get on a sales call. And what I do for my clients essentially is to help them with their email marketing, help them create more customers, create repeat customers, build them automation that ties into their website and their email platform, specifically ConvertKit. So when what I do helps those that already have a list, that are engaging with their list, and so on and so forth. So one of the questions I ask is, how big is your list? One of the questions I ask is, are you on ConvertKit? And if you answer no, are you looking to transfer to ConvertKit? And if you say no, then okay, well, we're not going to be a good fit, right? And I just have to say no. So I put these things on the project brief because that helps me filter through and not waste time. And I don't want to waste my time. I don't want to waste their time. And so coming up with whatever my ideal client is allows me to do that. I have specific questions on there that I'm actually looking to see the personality of the person that's filling this out as well. Meaning, have they thought about it, the project? Meaning, are they just cutting and pasting what they filled into somebody else's form? I can tell these things when I get these form submissions. And for me, that's like, okay, then they're just looking for a pair of hands. They just want somebody to write lines of code or write an email or build them an automation. And that's not me. Like, there are more cost-effective options than me in that well. And so that's, I try to figure out what that list of characteristics are that I actually really enjoy. But I also, it's important to know the list of characteristics that you don't want too, and be able to try to use those to vet as you start to do your sales process with them.
I love that stuff about what you don't want. Like, I mean, I built an agency up to 17 people, and you know, some of the things I would look out for that I don't want is I need a client that's going to be capable of getting me the content. And I didn't really have a good filter for that in the front end, but I love your idea of having your form. Just, it's not just about what's your budget. I mean, that's the beginner move. Like, do you have budget, so that we don't waste each other's time or whatever.
Mhm.
But there's so many things you can drill into, and even just knowing that you're a ConvertKit specialist, immediately I started thinking about people I know who use ConvertKit. Like,
Mhm.
it's a filtering mechanism. And another one is that I need a client that can communicate effectively. And there's sometimes people like your client, you hear horror story. There are a lot of horror stories where like freelancers disappear, but it also happens the other way where the client disappears and you can't get a hold of them, and you
Mhm.
need some stuff to make the project successful. So I look for clear communication, and I used to also look for somebody having an assistant, because they're it just, I know that they're gonna, there's a lot going on. There's always more to a website project than on the surface, and they need, if they have more help around them, it's more likely to get done quicker, I guess is what
Hmm.
I'm saying, because they already have a busy life. But
Yeah.
um
Yeah. I mean, to your point about the clear communication, that's why I have my form.
yeah,
Because if they don't even fill in the form, or they fill it in with just cutting and pasting off of whatever other forms they filled out online,
yeah,
I know that. And for me, I don't want to pick up a phone. Like,
yeah,
that's not my form of communication. I communicate via email primarily, Slack on occasion for some clients. But then the call is kind of like a quick hit call. I don't want to have these epic long 2.5 hour phone sessions. Like,
yeah,
that just destroys an entire day. So if you can't fill out the form in the way that I ask on specific, I tell them like things like, I ask them for 5 goals, right? And I want SMART goals, meaning what's success look like for this project, right? And so if they say we just need more traffic, or we need more email subscribers, or we need this, that, and the other, I'm like, okay, well, you're in the ballpark, I guess, but like, what's specific? Like 20%? 50%? Are we doubling your email list? Like, what is specific about the goal, right? But if they're just increase, or whatever, for me, I'm like, okay, they didn't really even think about it. And so if I ask them a question while we're engaged and it's a logic question, just in case, like if I have to send something over to your sales team because they filled something out on a website, or they clicked a certain link on an email, and there's an automation that triggers off to that, that has to be super specific so that the experience is right for
right.
both your team as well as your potential customers. So that, I look for that level of detail there to know if they can communicate via email through a form, essentially, right? So I'm with you on that, the clear communication. I didn't even think about the assistant thing, but for me, I'm like, I just want to deal. I almost don't want anybody in between, right? Like I would much rather just
You need
deal
the
with,
decision maker.
right,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, there's benefits to that too. Well, let's do it. We're going to come back to focusing on building sites for clients, but I just want to do a quick fun exercise with you. You and I are both like podcasters, right? So we have what do you know about me as a guy who's spent a lot of time thinking about uh, defining your perfect client and stuff like that? Like, what do you know about me simply by the fact that I'm similar to you in some ways related to podcasting? Like, what's some customer avatar stuff or just avatar stuff you know about me because of what we do? Like, podcaster is the industry, right? But what
Right.
am I as a avatar? If you had to
So,
guess, yeah,
yeah, I mean, putting me on the spot here, but I mean, as far as from a podcaster perspective, I mean, obviously when we started working, on coordinating this date, from my end, like it was quick. It was like, hey, is this date good? Is this, and we did it
yeah,
over Twitter, right? And so
yeah,
it
yeah,
was like, there wasn't really a formal thing to it, right? Like it was like, hey, look, we're going to talk about this. We're going to meet at this time. Good. Awesome. Let's do it. Right.
yeah,
Whereas, and that's cool. Like that's in part how I do it. I do it via email. I take it off of Twitter and I just basically say, here, I'm going to send you an email with the link in it and so on and so forth, just so that in my own ecosystem, I track it.
yeah,
I just make sure everything's good to go. But I've been on guest pod, podcast before where it's like super formal.
yeah.
Like I even had one where we did a phone screen first, and I was like, a phone screen? Like, all right, that's new, right? And so, I mean, to each his own. But for me, I like the casual kind of like, like, all right, let's just do it. Like that podcasting for me, I've been doing it for so long,
How
is
long?
like I've been doing it since 2014.
Yeah, that's what I think. That's when I started mine, and that so part of the reason why I didn't need to have a phone call, and I don't do screen calls or anything, but normally there's more process. But I've known about you for years. I've listened to several of your shows. Like I know what's inside the box, so I'm
Right,
already
right.
you're already qualified. It's really just a formality.
Right.
And so,
Yeah.
yeah,
To your point, like if there's another podcast host, then I just go listen to the show and I'm like, all right, we're good. But if there's not, and
yeah,
I can't even find a podcast that they've been on before, then I'm like, let's just have like a 15-minute conversation first.
yeah,
'Cause, as a podcaster, it's got to be, person can't just be knowledgeable, but they have to also, there's got to be some story there to it, right? Like there has to be some entertainment value there too. So for me, it's like, podcast to podcast host, like that's easy. It's a quick win. Other people might have to go down the road a little bit, but for me, like I said, like my first podcast was WP Dev Table, and I did it with Bronson Quick and later on Tom Harrigan, and it was so informal. We were basically pulling up Google Hangouts, pushing go live, and then talking into just even our headsets from our phones, right? And like
yeah.
it was maybe once a month. Like it was so irregular. It was ridiculous. But that for me is what podcasting is. And so when I run into other folks that are a little bit more casual in it, it's a refreshing sort of thing.
Yeah, that's awesome. I appreciate you saying that. And since we're on the topic of podcasting, what impact has it had on you as a service provider?
It's built my business. It's funny that you mentioned that. This week, in fact, well, at the time of this recording, 2 days ago, I came out with an episode for season 7. And season 7 of the podcast is actually about the ideal client.
Yeah,
But I talked about, because it started out with an email that I sent out to my list of why I started podcasting in the first place. I got such a great response from that. I was like, I should just make a podcast about this. Be pretty meta about it,
yeah,
but the thing is podcasting allowed me to also help shape who I serve. right? My ideal client as well. The podcast that I referenced it was a loose, we called it a irregular, how do we say it? A loose, irregular podcast of geeks sitting around a table talking, right? And so we would have a green room beforehand and after, and it was all WordPress folks. And just hearing and engaging in the conversation afterwards, because there would be like 3 or 4 of us on the call, hearing their stories of client interactions and things like that. I'm like, oh, I don't want that. I got to keep an eye out for that one, right? Or like, hey, how do I get a client like that? Where'd you find that client? Or, that sort of a thing. And so that helped me in the early stages really start to figure out who I served well, but also to hear who I could talk to more, right? And that network of guests that we had on the show, had it not been for the podcast, I would have never met them, or maybe chance encountering at a WordCamp or something like that. But it, I got work from them, and I referred work to them. And so it helped our businesses in a way grow our networks. And had I not done that podcast, that just the Google Hangout randomly every month, I don't know that we'd be talking, right? And so I know how podcasting has impacted my business, and that's why I'd much rather do a podcast than write a blog post. I know that podcast in and of itself had 19 episodes. I know 19 tweets. I know 19 Facebook shares. I know 19 Instagram stories. I know 19 anything in this day and age would have never done anything that 19 episodes did for me. So for me, I'm all about podcasting and how it's been able to build my business, but also shape who I serve and become a go-to person. I became the WooCommerce guy for a while. People were just like, "Oh, you're the WooCommerce guy on the podcast. Can you help me out?" And so, like you said before, it's more referable. You start to hear, because that's what I talked about all the time on the show was WooCommerce. And so, for me, podcast is it. That's why I got this big microphone here, and clients are always like, "Hey, what's that all about? Like, you're a radio guy?" But
Yeah.
I'm just like, "Hey, yeah, I do podcasting." So
That's really cool. I mean, we both started our podcast in 2014, but if you're still thinking on the fence about starting a podcast to help grow your business, it's still early days in my opinion. I mean, yeah, we're tech people, we're online people, we're like kind of early adopters, but there's just so much. I mean, podcasts are going to get even easier to get access to in cars and things like that. Like they're going places.
mhm.
It's like what YouTube did to TV. It's kind of like that for radio. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I think even just as a little side thing there is like if you're starting up a business, bring your customers onto your podcast. And if you're serving people and you're helping people, you could widen your network in that way. You could bring on colleagues, you could bring on potential customers, highlight existing customers and things like that, where your show is essentially your marketing. And it's super easy, like you said, like I mean, they've got apps on the phone now where you just press record and, boom, the phone conversation records that way. It's so easy nowadays that, now it's just a matter of uploading it to a website and away you go. And you don't need like Joe Rogan numbers, right? Like
Right.
everybody's like, oh, podcast's so hard. I mean, there's a lot of work to marketing it and getting folks on the show, but look, if it's focused in on your business, then do whatever it is for your business. Don't worry about those big numbers because you just need whatever you need into your business.
Well, if you know your ideal client well, um, I have videos with like YouTube videos with extremely low view counts, but the people that actually care about what I'm talking about there are like a perfect fit client. Who cares if it's like 100 views or whatever and not 100,000?
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking to someone very specific. Um, that's that's just the way it works.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of bringing your ideal client onto the podcast, I think that's a brilliant move because there's this uh, concept called resonance, right? Like you and I, you were kind of mentioning it. You were kind of resonating with like, oh, Chris is not super formal with the podcast. Like It's going to be laid back. It's going to be two people sitting on a porch talking, and the world gets to listen in, which is how, that's like my hack as a learner. I do like 5K every morning, every day. Sometimes I was walking, sometimes I was running, but I'm always listening to a podcast. So for 10 years, I've been learning, listening to other people's conversations who talk about things that are important to me. It's like a total hack. And but you start resonating with people, that you attract certain people and you repel certain people. So
Mm-hmm.
like for you, somebody doesn't, if they're just looking at, oh, I'm just going to outsource the dev, I'm just going to throw something over the wall and just get it off my plate, like that's not your best client, because you're a technology partner, a strategy partner. It's a partnership. That's like, I can get that. And when people, some people want that,
Mm-hmm.
and some people have the other mindset. um so that resonance is cool. And the thing about bringing your customers on is, like, you resonate like as a leader in your business, but a client is going to have, they're not, it's a different, they have a different avatar than you, the business owner or whatever. So by bringing that ideal client on stage, it allows other people to have that subconscious resonance of like, oh yeah, I'm a already moving, somewhat successful business person. I need to really level up on my marketing and stuff. Like it's, and there's like somebody talking on your show about who's just like them. It's super
Mm-hmm.
powerful.
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to that whole social proof aspect. It's like on sales pages, people are like, I want to put like my, you know, testimonials there. I want to put the Facebook grabs. I want to put the tweets on there that are talking about my business. This is like that on steroids, right? Like,
Yeah.
you can talk for a half an hour with your customer, um, and you want to attract more of those same customers. There's no better way than to have somebody sitting there talking to you and engaging with you and learning a little bit more, like a fly on the wall, like you. Like, same thing. I try to do that in my show. Is like, I get asked all the time from guests. They're like, "You have questions that you ask me?" Nope. We're just gonna have a conversation about this, and we're gonna go. We're gonna.
Yeah.
It's gonna be back and forth, and it's a conversation where you feel comfortable enough. Ask me questions, right? And like, as the host, I want to answer questions too. So, from that perspective, it's just like they'd walked into the room, and now they're in a meeting, quote unquote, between me and another customer. And so it's super powerful in a way where, like, just put little clips of audio things on your site. And I haven't yet done this, and I say yet because something's in the works, but I haven't yet done this because it hasn't happened. My podcast isn't for my services, isn't who I serve, right? And so, it's funny how, like, you can leverage the power of podcasting in a way that people don't ever think about. They're just like,
Yeah.
all right, you just churn these things out every single week. And that's not always the case. You can be super specific with it. There are small podcasts that are just local podcasts. Um, I saw a sticker the other day at the pizza place by me, and it was a podcast for Oceanside, New York. And I was like, that's awesome, right? Like, small town. Oh, great. And I grabbed the listen just as here it was. It wasn't superly overproduced or anything like that, but it was pretty cool. It was like, in and around the town, and they talked about like current events and things that were going on in the town and stuff. So I was like, oh, that's pretty cool, but if that host had any ambition of working with local businesses, just bring them onto the show. You gave them a 30-minute or 45-minute commercial, right? And
Yeah.
like, boom, that's easy.
Yeah, that's super awesome. And I'm going to throw out a pro tip since we're wrapping on that. One of the things is, it's relatively easy to get testimonials. A lot of people are scared to ask for them, but what's much harder to do are case studies. So one of my hacks is, I will record a podcast with a customer, and then I have somebody else who helps write up a case study out of it with their permission. So it's the idea of doing a big detail, like jumping on an hour call is like no big deal. But the idea of like, all right, I need to do an interview. And I tried it. I tried putting like a form on my site that I could ask the questions that I thought I needed answers to build a great case study, and people didn't do the work.
Mm.
It wasn't there's too much friction there. It didn't. But when they come on the show, it's like different. It's easier for them, it's easier for you, and then you can do it. So that's my pro tip out there. What advice do you have for, let's say somebody's building learning management system websites for clients, or membership sites, online courses, whatever they want to call them, and they're a little bit newer to the game, and they want to do this work, but there's this tension between, when I'm early, I'll take any work that I can get. I just got to get paid. Um, but that's exactly what I did. Like, it
Mhm.
took me a while to specialize and get clear and all this stuff. But if we could go back and talk to an earlier version of ourselves, how can we? What's like version one of, like, all right, I'm opening up shop to build these types of sites for clients. What kind of what can I do to kind of help filter and attract the right people?
Um, well, the early version of myself, I now I don't do this, but back then I used to build out e-commerce sites. Very similar. It's like, it's just a type of site, right? So if you're trying to build LMS or membership sites or whatever, what I did was I said, let me build them from the ground up, because there's plenty of people that have this idea that they want to put out there, and I can do that. So let me do that. Well, what happens is that this isn't just a brochure site, right? There's a lot of things once it's launched that the business has to understand and how to manage it, right? So what I found out was a lot of these e-commerce sites that I would build a year or two later were no longer in existence, right? And what does that look like for me and my portfolio or my case study or so on and so forth? When somebody clicks the link and they don't doesn't go anywhere, 404 page, right? So what I did was, okay, I'm done doing build from the ground up. I want to build on top of existing. So if you know that, and the thing was, I was filling a gap, because basically people would launch these websites, get it out there, get some traction, and then they wanted to put the final 20% of their business into the website. They basically just did it out of the box. So much in the same way, like I built LMS before. And so, they don't know all of, like, hey, what does the students really want? And members, what are they using? And they try to put all these bells and whistles in there. Well, go in whatever you're good at, and start to try to identify maybe just out of the box installs of, let's say, LifterLMS, right? That have no customization to it, right? But yet they've got students, they got members in there. And so maybe there's something there where the business now has a need to add new features, maybe a social element, maybe a gaming element, maybe something else to it that the students want. So now you can go into a conversation and say, hey, look, I've been doing this for a little bit. And I know sites like yourself, sometimes you have these ideas for gamification or a social board element, social profile element, or maybe you're trying to install a forum into it, things of that nature. Is any of those things popped up in your membership area or your business before? And then they may say no, and that's fine. But if they say yes, now you know that they have a specific need that you could help fulfill. Um, and that is going to stick around, right? Because they've already got the traction inside of their own business. They're just trying to enhance it and cater to their own quote unquote customers. So that would be my suggestion moving forward, is like, you want to find a client that's going to be around. You don't want somebody that just has an idea off of the back of a barbecue that they had over the weekend. Say, hey, yeah, that sounds awesome. I mean, Facebook did it, right? And so I can do it. And like, it just doesn't happen that way. So I would look for ways in which you could find a client that understands a little bit about the business, and that's only through being established in some way already, and then identifying potential needs of that business, that you could help fulfill.
That is amazing. I learned a lot right there listening to you. And I think that idea, well, one way I hear it said is it's a lot harder to build an online business to go from 0 to 100,000 or whatever, but to go from 100,000 to a million, if you use that as a filter, like a filter, which feels scary as like, especially if you're newer, but like this, I need an established business owner that's already making money with their expertise. Let's say at least 100K, maybe they're an author, speaker, coach, whatever. They're trying to stop living on hotel rooms and on planes and all being away from their family, and they're looking to productize their workshops or their public speaking or build a higher fidelity version of a book. Now we got something. And
Hmm.
I'm not saying the beginners don't deserve to be helped or served, but it can be a more challenging client because yeah, you might make the money. I mean, there's people who have an idea who have plenty of financial resources, but um, you might get paid and that's fine. But like you said, there's nothing. I know when you were telling your story, I could feel it in my heart where I've seen sites I struggled to build and like move mountains that just not there anymore. And I'm like,
Hmm.
that's kind of sad. I never really kind of thought about that. But I had experienced it before.
Yeah, I mean, I can remember a couple of sites where, like, you know, case in one case was a hair salon, right? And they
Yeah.
basically wanted to put up an online course to help stylists. And, this was real early on in my career. And like, it was like pulling teeth to get anything from them. Like, and then it got down to the point where I was just like, they were like, oh, we need this to move a little bit, like the button to move a little bit. And like, it just became very micromanaged. And it got to a point where like, I was like, all right, I don't want to deal with this anymore, because they had never, like, I said, do you have a client list, like a student list that you're going to launch this to? No, we're going to build it and they're going to come, right? And like, okay, well, I've heard that before. But the thing is, it's like, you don't know that this happened. Well, once our relationship ended, it was literally 8 months later, I went back to the site. Their whole salon wasn't even there anymore. Like, it wasn't even like, I'm like, where did this go? So I Googled it and it was gone. Like, I don't know what they had with their business. I don't know if this was like the last hurrah to try to save the business or something. But I mean, for me, it was like, if they don't understand exactly where they could be in their business, um, then for me, that was a tough pill to swallow on my end, because they were looking for me to give them the world for the cheapest price, and they wanted it done in the way that they thought it was. So like, you just want to write the lines of code yourself, because
Right.
that's what you're telling me to do.
Yeah.
So that's why I started looking for more established businesses to, like you said, like if it's an online coach, or if it's a live coach rather, and they're trying to look for an online version of what they already do, so they have money coming in. Maybe it's a way, like, they do want to save some time. And that, to be honest with you, you're not building them the website, right? What you're building them is to save time. Their solution is to save time. They don't want to travel anymore, this, that, and the other thing. And that's the other side of the coin that you really have to, you get better at, is that when you're crafting your ideal client, what's their actual motivation, right? For a lot of my clients, is the same motivation that I have. It's to be able to actually get away from the screen and live their life, right? Whether that's spend time with their family, whether that's to travel, whatever, right? But what I do for my clients is automation. They want to stop the hours and hours and hours of manual cut and pasting and trying to figure out how to launch things, but they also want to capitalize on their investments too, um, in a way that dropping people into an email sequence that everybody goes through, is not effective use of their ad money, right? So what I've found is, okay, let me see who's selling things online, who's a coach, who's running a course membership, things like that, that well, they might be primed for wanting to step away from their selling, right? They don't want to do the quarterly launches anymore because it burns them out, or they want to change from that open close cart process into more of an evergreen sales pitch. And so I'm saving them time. I'm not building them their ConvertKit account, although that's the actual technical things that I do. But what the result is that now they have time back in their day to do whatever they want to do. And that's why they started their business in the first place. And once you hit on that, that's actually what will drive more people to you, because they'll just refer their friends to you and so on and so forth. You'll just knock down that first domino.
That is so well said. The world has changed. Um, Companies used to put the product at the center of the universe. The companies that win now put their customer at the center of the universe and surround them with support, and they focus on their goals, buying back time, financial freedom, whatever. There's all this stuff that they want. It's not, your product's important and part of the journey, but the product is a means to an end.
Mm-hmm.
Res is at res.com, REZZ.com. You also have an email course on your website. Can you tell
Mm-hmm.
us how to get it and what we can get out of it?
Sure. You could go to res.com. It's right there, front and center. You can't miss it. And it's a sequence of 5 emails, and it helps you get clients. The underlying thing is also your ideal client. It helps you kind of craft that. But it's a set of videos and exercises that, one, you're going to learn how to look at Twitter in a way that maybe you haven't looked at it before to get clients. That's one way. How to use Craigslist. People look down on Craigslist, but I got PGA, Gander Mountain, and Sony all through Craigslist, using these sort of methods. And so it's just a matter of being able to implement certain things, being diligent about your time, and being really specific on who you're looking for. And this is essentially your runway in order to do that.
That is amazing. And one more quick question before we go. Why? I think it's awesome to have the self wisdom and knowledge to know what you like and know what you don't like. What do you like about being solo operator? Because I see in the course creation space, I see both avatars. I see people who they're like, I don't want a team. I'm just going to do my thing. I'm going to scale it and do it, work within my constraint. There's other people who like, I need a giant team behind me. So like, how's that work for you? Like, what is it that
Yeah, for me, look, I worked for Fortune 100 companies and small boutique design firms as well. I managed teams before, upwards of 30 some odd people. And managing developers is a unique sort of position to be in.
yeah,
Um, where there's a lot of people skills that you have to have. I'm not saying
yeah,
that any other manager is any different, but it's just, for me as a developer, I'm a creator. I like to be able to engage at a level with the clients that managing a team may not give me, but also to be able to just move interests, or like just be able to, shift my day because, my son is having a bad one, right? So
yeah.
I could go outside and play with him versus, oh, I have to stay here and manage a team, or there's a client meeting or so on and so forth. It just allows me that freedom and flexibility to run the business the way that I want to. And you know, it's not for everyone. It's just for me.
That's awesome. Jason Resnick, res with 3z's.com. Go check out his email course. I know. So the thing is, the cool thing about podcasts, why I love them is, and what I try to do is I try to take somebody like Jason's decades of experience and condense it down into like days, or ideally like 45-ish minutes. So I know that you've taken all your experience. How can I add incredible value for somebody who's trying to get more clients and condense that down into 5 emails? I know it's rock solid. Go check it out at res.com. And thank you so much, Jason, for coming on the show and sharing your journey with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Chris. I appreciate it.
And that's a wrap for this episode of LMScast. I'm your guide, Chris Badgett. I hope you enjoyed the show. This show was brought to you by LifterLMS, the #1 tool for creating, selling, and protecting engaging online courses to help you get more revenue, freedom, and impact in your life. Head on over to LifterLMS.com and get the best gear for your course creator journey. Let's build the most engaging, results-getting courses on the internet.